Hey, it's Rachel with Journey Back Quilts. In this series, we're going to be making traditional quilt blocks. If you're quilting along with us, you will have a finished quilt with 16 blocks by the end of this series. Today's block we're going to be making is the Combination Star Block. Let's get started. To make this Combination Star Block, we're going to need several different fabrics. So depending on how you want yours to look is going to depend on the fabrics that you choose. I'm using a background fabric that is Confetti Cotton's Cloud, and I'm using some of my leftovers from Lori Holt's lines. And so this is going to be our square triangles that we're going to turn into our hourglass blocks, and they are measuring 5.5 inches square. So I have 2 background and 2 colors, and that's going to make 4 hourglass blocks. And then I'm going to need 4 4.5 inch squares for my diamond corners, and then a 4.5 inch square for the center, and 20 2.5 inch squares to snowball these corners. Okay, so I'm going to take these 2 to the sewing machine first. We're going to make our half square triangles. We're going to sew on either side, making them 2 at a time. And I'll leave a link up here in the corner that you can watch how to make half square triangles 2 at a time. So first I'm going to just mark a line down the center diagonally from point to point on just one side of each of these white background blocks. Okay, and then we're going to layer those right sides together with our 5.5 inch colored blocks. And we're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam away from this line on both sides of that line. So let's take this over to the sewing machine. And I'm using my 1/4 inch seam guide foot so that I can put this guide right on the line and sew 1/4 inch away from that line. You can also use Lori Holt's seam guide or this diagonal seam tape to be able to do this technique as well. So I'm just going to leave my needle down, flip it around, and keep sewing the other side. Do the same thing to the second one. And I like to set my seams, which just means you're going to iron it flat. That seam that you just sewed, that helps the fabric to lay flat again before we trim it up. So let's go ahead and trim it next. I'm just going to stack both of these together and then set my ruler right on that line that we just drew and cut these apart. Then I'm going to iron these going towards the dark side. Now we're going to take 2 of our half square triangles. We're going to put them right sides together so that the colors are opposite. The white's going to go on the dark color. And I'm going to just nest those seams, which means that these seams are just butting right up next to each other. I'm not even going to square these up yet. I'm just going to layer them like this. Okay, and then we're going to draw another line down the center diagonally. And we're going to sew again on either side of this line at a 1/4 inch seam. So let's go do that. Just make sure that your seam is nested. We don't want them stacked on top of each other or too far away from each other. This is going to give us that perfect point in the center of our hourglass block. And lift, rotate, sew back down the other side. And do the same thing to the other one. Go ahead and set your seams again. Then I'm just going to stack these together to trim them down that line we just drew. Now when we open one up, look, you have a perfect hourglass block. We're going to iron this seam, spinning the seams, and then we will trim them up to 4.5 inches. To spin the seam, you can see that the white is going towards the dark here and this side here as well. So we're just going to have this one go in it like a pinwheel. So this is going to go down, this one's going to go up, that seam is going to pop out right there, and we're just going to press that seam and then hit it with the nose right there in the middle. And you'll see this mini 4 patch right here in the middle. Isn't that cute? I'm going to flip it to the top as well and just make sure that my fabric is laying correctly all the way around. Sometimes the fabric likes to kind of fold over itself, and just when you press it down, you'll see that it made a perfect looking seam, but there's enough fabric to make a little flap. And we just want to push that fabric all the way open so that it is going to be square when we square it up. So go ahead and iron all of your hourglass blocks just like we just did, spinning those seams, and then press it from the top as well. And now we're going to square these up to 4.5 inches. So we want to put our ruler on the center line using this diagonal right on the diagonal of our block. And the center of 4.5 is 2.25. So we're going to put the 2.25 line right here running through the center. It would be running through the center this way as well if you're really wanting to double check. And this way we can see we're going to trim up this edge, and then we'll rotate to trim off this excess edge. So there's a little bit of extra fabric past that 4.5 inch mark on your ruler. That way we can square it up evenly. Okay, rotate, then line up 4.5 with this side and the bottom, and then double check. 2.25 should still be in the middle. Your diagonal line on your ruler should still be on the diagonal of your block. Okay, and then cut side and top, and now you have a squared 4.5 inch block. So do that to all 4 of these, and I'll see you back here in a second. Now that we have all of those done, now it's time to make our flip and stitch blocks or our snowballed corners. So what we're going to do is replace the corners in each of these blocks with a white block. Now, if you want to go through and mark the diagonal of each of these blocks with your marker, that's totally fine. You can do that. What I like to do is just to use that diagonal seam tape or my Seam So Easy guide and just line up the corners with my needle to the middle line and just sew down the center of the block. We're going to do that on the opposite corners of each of the blocks first, and then we will press and trim and iron them open, and then we'll do the opposite sides. So this is a great way we can just chain piece all of these. So the 4 that are going to be our diamonds in the corner and the one center as well. So take all of these to the sewing machine and let's get going. So here you can see I have this diagonal seam tape, and we have a link for that in the description box below if you would like some. I just line up that center line with my needle, and I'm going to sew these using this diagonal seam tape. It makes it so much easier. So I'm just going to start with one corner. We're going to match up the raw edges together so that it is replacing the corner. And this is an important step. If they're not matching up perfectly, then your corner is not going to match up perfectly, and it's going to look a little wonky. So we want to make sure that those are lined up perfectly and that our seam is lined up perfectly. So if you haven't done diagonal seams before, I would recommend going ahead and just marking your line there, and then it will kind of give you that guide to be able to get a straight stitch. So I'm just going to lower my needle first and butt this corner up to the needle. And you know what? It helps to have an open foot for this. I mean, it's totally fine with that foot too, but this one you'll be able to see a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to lower my needle, butt the corner of the white block right up to my needle, and then line this corner up with the center line of the diagonal seam tape. And then just go ahead and stitch it down, keeping this corner following that line the whole time. Just like that. And we can chain piece these. So I'm going to do all of one side first. And it really doesn't matter which side you do first because we're going to do all 4 sides. So I'm lining that up. And then I'm going to line it up with my needle again. And this corner with the center line. And stitch down following that line the whole time. All the way through. Okay. So I'm going to keep doing that for these next few blocks, and I'll see you back here when we do the opposite side. Okay, now that I just finished the one side, these are all connected together in a chain, and I'm going to take my little cutting gizmo, which we have a link for a blade saver one that we have in our shop in the description box below if you would like one. And now we're going to do the opposite corner. So we don't want to do the corners right next to it because our blocks are going to overlap a little bit. So we want to make sure we get this trimmed and then ironed open before we do the next one. But because the one opposite from it isn't going to touch it, then it really isn't going to matter. So let's go ahead and do this opposite side. Same thing, lining up those raw edges. Line up that corner and sew down the diagonal. So I'm going to chain piece all 5 of these, and I'll see you back here in just a second. Now that I'm done chain piecing the opposite side, I'm going to clip apart the connecting threads and then go set those seams. So remember, you're just going to iron your block flat again. That just helps so that all these little puckers that the stitchers made on the fabric will lay flat, so that when we trim it precisely and we don't accidentally make a mistake. So go ahead and set the seam, and I'll see you at the cutting board. All right, I just set my seam, and now I'm going to stack a few of them at a time going together, maybe 2 at a time, and then we're going to put the 1/4 inch line of our ruler on the seam that we just made and trim that off a 1/4 inch away. So you want to make sure that if you're stacking them that they're going the same direction, that you're not cutting them the opposite way. There we go. All right, there we go. Now we need to iron these corners. Some patterns say that you can just iron them going out towards that cornerstone, and that's the easiest way to do it. But if you are finding that your corners are still not matching up perfectly to your blocks, that they're not square, it's looking a little wonky, try opening your seam and see if that makes a difference, because sometimes the bulk of these seams kind of shifts the fabric down just enough to make it look a little weird. I'm going to try it by just pressing my seam over towards the corner, and let's see how it looks. Doesn't look too bad. I'm going to use my ruler just to measure it up, see if everything's looking good, and it is. Phew! So that's a great way to find out if things are looking great or not. If they're not, then try opening that seam and then see if it's measuring better. Sometimes you can squeak by just enough to get it to look right. Okay, now we're going to go add the other 2 corners to finish off our diamond shape. Let's go to the sewing machine. Okay, same thing. We're going to just match up our raw edges with our new block. And yes, it is going to overlap your 2 blocks on the corners here. And that's perfectly fine. The only suggestion I have for this is because there are so many seams here, your needle might have a hard time going over all of that without bunching it all up. So grab a scrap piece of fabric out of your trash bin or something that you're not going to use maybe just a corner of the corners that you just trimmed off, and start it as your leader fabric first to keep those threads up above the machine so that it's not pushing all of the fabric down into the machine. If you're still having trouble, you might want to change your needle if it's been a while. Okay, so I'm going to line up that corner with my needle and the opposite corner with my line. And I'm just going to sew that down at a diagonal seam, doing that to all of these and to the opposite corners. So I think you get the gist of this, so go ahead and do all that, and I'll see you back at the cutting board once we square these all up. And now that we're all done putting both sides together, I'm going to go set these seams and trim just like we did the last time and iron them going just the same way. We're just going to push them out, see if they match up really well, and look at that fun little diamond. Isn't that cute? So go ahead and do that. Set your seam, trim, iron, and I'll see you back here. All right, now I'm just going to double check that these are measuring 4.5 inches square and that there's nothing larger that we need to trim off. So 2.25 inch line is going to go right through your center points, and that will show you how to square it up. So if you have anything extra than that, go ahead and trim that off and double check all 5 of these. If they're just a hair short, that's okay. They'll still work. But if they're 1/4 inch shy, or they look really wonky, like one side of your corner is like really short inside, you may want to redo that corner. And I can hear you already saying, but Rachel, I already trimmed it. How do I redo it? You're just going to cut another little square that is the 2.5 inches, and you're just going to line it up just like you would, and then just follow that 1/4 inch line, matching up that fabric. Okay, everything looks great. I'm going to get one of my design boards out now, and let's lay this block out. So we've got the center here is my bright red, and then we've got the corners up at the top and the sides. And then we've got the corners here, and I've got my fabric directional, so I'm going to try to keep that going the same direction just for my own OCD sake. Ha ha ha. And then we're going to put our hourglass blocks going like a bow tie. So it's making another box within the center. Isn't that cool? So pretty. And there you go. That's your combination block. So cool, huh? Combination star block, I should say. So same as all the other blocks, we're going to sew this like a 9 patch. We're just going to sew these 3 together in a row, and then the center and the bottom. So I'm going to just start with these 2 blocks and sew them together, chain piecing all of these, and then we'll add the 3rd block to our row. Let's go to the sewing machine. And there's nothing to nest here. Just make sure the raw edges are connected. I'm going to switch my foot out to the 1/4 inch seam guide foot, just because I am used to that little cheater, little helper there. Okay, and then the next one. You do want to be careful not to sew past the point of our diamond blocks. When you have the diamond up on top, you can see right here, there's an X that marks the spot right where we sewed these seams together. So right there is where we want our next seam to hit, not past it, so that we chop off the corners of our blocks. So just be careful of that. Otherwise, you are good to just sew and have fun, relax. Remember to roll those shoulders back, sit up straight. And breathe. Don't hold your breath. Okay, so now I'm going to clip apart these connecting threads. And this one is my top block. So I'm going to add that third block to it. Matching up those raw edges. And then the center. Make sure that the blocks are going the opposite way than these blocks. So these ones we're sewing it from the color to the block. This one's the white to our diamond block. Okay, I'm going to clip apart those connecting threads and we're going to take it back to the ironing board. If you've been watching this series, then you'll know we need to iron these going in opposite directions. So I've got the outside rows going the same direction. I think we're going to iron them going towards the hourglass or the bow ties. So I'm just going to pick up this block and let that seam scooch over to the hourglass. And look, I've got perfect point there. So nice. And same with this one. Okay. Do the same thing to the other side. Okay, and then this one we're going to iron out towards this side. So we're going to pick up this block, have the seam laying down there, set the iron down to push the seam over towards our hourglass. Say that 10 times fast. Our hourglass block. All right, there we go. And now we can nest our seams so we get those perfect points here in the center. We're just going to nest those seams right there, sewing it down at a 1/4 inch seam, just like always, and do the same thing to the other side, and our block will be finished. Let's go back to the sewing machine. All right, so I'm going to nest those seams. That's what I want to focus on more than the raw edges. Nest those seams and then match up the raw edges on the side. Now, if they don't match up at the top, don't worry about it as much as nesting that seam. That's more important than trying to get all the way to the top there. Once you get past that nested seam, then you can get the next one nested. And you can look at it. If you lift up your foot, you can rotate it like this and make sure you can see that it's touching each other. Or if you can just look at it from the side like I do, then you can get them nested there. But use that needle as your third hand. You don't have to get everything lined up to start. You can do a little chunk at a time. So once I get past that, then I'm just going to straighten this raw edge out. Make sure that I'm sewing right by that point and not on top of it. All right, let's see how it turned out. Oh, nice. Good points, and our points are still intact there. Perfect. Now we're going to do the other side. The nice thing about this block is that no matter which way you rotate your block, it's the same. So you don't have to worry about getting everything symmetrical that way, because it already is. Okay, I'm going to nest those first seams, getting those in place, and match up the raw edges. Okay, once you get past that, then nest the next set of seams. Hold those in place. Once you get past that, pause, adjust, and continue. Okay, moment of truth. Let's see how it turned out. Oh, awesome. Our points are still intact, and those are matching up perfectly. Great job! So now we're just going to go iron these last 2 seams, square it up, and our block will be finished. So there's different ways you can iron your last seams. Some patterns may tell you to open your seam. Some patterns may tell you to iron it to one side or to the inside, however you want to do it. With this series, you can do it however you want. If you want to open your seam, that's fine. I think I'm going to press mine away from the center towards the outside. That seems to be where it's wanting to go anyway, so I'm just going to let it. Looks good. And then I give it a good press going opposite directions, not pulling or stretching. Just let the iron do the work for you, just to get those seams nice and flat. I like nice flat seams because it makes it easier to work with when you're going to put the next piece on next to it or the border or sashing. And look at that. Isn't that cool how there's a secondary block inside of this block? So pretty. Okay, this should be measuring 12.5 inches square. So 6 1/4 is our center line. It's going to be running right through all those points, both directions. And wow, it's like perfection. I am amazed. That doesn't always happen, even to me. I've got just a tiny hair right here. I'm going to trim off, and maybe just a tiny bit this way. Well, maybe not. Maybe it's perfect. So the other thing you want to watch out for is all of these points we want to keep intact for when we put the next border on or whatever, so that we don't, if we trim it too short, then we're going to sew right over those points. So we want 1/4 inch from the point to the edge of our fabric. So I'm just kind of rotating things, making sure it looks good that way. And it does. So I'm going to leave it alone. Great job making this combination star block. Hey, thanks so much for joining me today making this combination star block. I hope you enjoyed this and you're going to go make one for yourself. If you'd like more tips, tricks, and tutorials, I invite you to join our society, a membership full of quilting tutorials to help you on your quilting journey. Next week, we're going to be making the friendship star block. I'll see you then. If you would like more tips, tricks, and tutorials, I invite you to join our society, a membership where you will get a library full of quilting tutorials, access to me, and all these other things that I can't remember. A membership that gives you a library full of quilting tutorials. A membership that helps you get a membership.